Yep. Yeah, what's going on, everybody? It's the Yahoo Strategy Show. I'm Dave Loughran at Laffy_D on the Twitters, joined by Greg Ehrenberg at GEhrenbergDFS. First time I've done this show ever. I think Greg's done this maybe a time or two in the past, but we're going to refresh his memory a little bit, and we're going to show me exactly what I'm doing. But I can't imagine it's all that different. It's a strategy show for Yahoo, sponsor of the show. Be sure to use the link in the description or the one that Mike's going to throw in the chat right now. Get a free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum just by signing up, depositing $10, which they'll then give you back in free play. And then you enter a paid contest, and we'll get you set up every single thing on the site for free, no strings attached. That's all you got to do. But you got to use the link, deposit $10, enter a paid contest, and they'll give you $10 in free play right back. Get every tool that we've got at Awesemo for the month for every sport, not just basketball. Now that that's out of the way, Greg, what's up, bro?
Not much. And here's what you need to know. We're going to be doing 30 minutes instead of an hour. So instead of talking for 60 minutes, you talk for 30, then you get on and do whatever it is you want to do with the rest of your day. Other than that, I think we got this.
Right. Yeah. Is that how it works? A 60-minute show, not a 30, means you talk for 60 instead of 30?
Something along those. You know, I'm not a rocket scientist.
Not a mathematician.
Yeah, who could do the exact math on these things? You know, we would need a whole research team on this. We would need, which, you know, I mean, we've got some sharp people that work with us. You know, Alex Baker, Steve Buzzer, but who knows who could do this kind of math?
Yeah, nobody has time for that anymore.
No.
Happy to have you guys with us, though. Hit that thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and if you want to join, hit that join down below. Free super chats each month, custom emojis, the sweet badges, and we'll always prioritize your questions and comments along with our premium Discord members. So, Greg, we got a Yahoo slate, and I think the first things first, just to break it all down, we've got ownership over at Awesemo, updated about an hour ago, so that's solid. Boom, bust tool, and all of that stuff. Usually, Yahoo is you got the $30,000 Wednesday night baller. Usually you're going to get some good value there, especially with the way the pricing is with the $200 budget. It does feel like they've shored it up a little bit lately, and not entirely, but a little bit tighter than we've seen in the past. Before we get into specific players, are there any really, really good values today on Yahoo that you're not going to get at other sites?
Yeah, I mean, we've got guys like Campaign, Jackson Hayes, Alec Burks, who are all around minimum price over on Yahoo, which is driving a lot of ownership. Actually, if you do look at our ownership projections, which are free to use today over at Awesemo.com, you'll see that four of the five most popular projected players are $14 and cheaper. So there is still a lot of really good cheap value to get here. And, you know, some of it's going to depend on, as we start talking about the point guard position, whether somebody like Cameron Payne plays or not, and if he's going to have any kind of minutes restriction, because we know that Chris Paul isn't in the mix for the Phoenix Suns. It would stand to reason that Cam Payne is going to play and start a point guard for the Suns at some point in time. But he hasn't played since January 22nd, and he only played 7 minutes in that game. So his status and whether we get an update on him, it's going to have he is listed as probable today, but more so just the minutes restriction workload on him is going to have a lot of bearing on the ownership here.
And it will be interesting to see if Cam Payne, not only if he plays, I think he's expected to play, but if he starts or comes off the bench. Now, I'll say this much. It's not a lower body. It's a wrist injury. So I think the likelihood that you get more minutes than you would from a guy that's coming off, you know, a hamstring or a bad ankle sprain is probably better. But actually, let's just kick it off with point guards. We'll start with Cam Payne. We don't need to start at the top. We can move around. Cameron Payne to me is a fascinating play today, because if you don't really want Aaron Holiday as your backup point guard, really. And I think Cam Payne will get those minutes. Maybe he starts and they stagger him with Booker. Maybe he comes off the bench and plays alongside Booker a decent amount, but gets all those backup point guard minutes. One way or another, I expect him to get all the minutes that Booker's not on the floor tonight.
Yeah, and we have seen reports that at some point Campaign is going to start at point guard for the Suns, and Cameron Johnson's going to move back to a reserve role. We just don't know if that means today. And I think what you said is a really pertinent point, which is this is a wrist injury for Campaign. This isn't, he's not coming back from a knee injury. It's not a turned ankle where there's potential issues with, number one, how is he going to feel? But then number two, also, you would presume that since it was a wrist injury, he was still able to, run, do his cardio, get his conditioning in. That's not always the same option if you have a turned ankle or something like that. So I do think the reporting is going to be key here. At some point, Campaign is going to start at point guard for the Suns in the near future. I'm just not sure if it's today or not, but if it is today, I think he's the best value play on the slate.
Best on the slate over Trey Lyles?
Yeah, because I'm not totally convinced that Trey Lyles starts again for the Kings. And then even if he does, it's not like he played a massive amount of minutes last game. He did he scored really well on a points per minute basis for fantasy purposes. But once again, he played 31 minutes, and I don't necessarily think that is what the plan is going forward, because here is other recent games for the Kings. 16 minutes, 6 minutes, 5 minutes, 3 minutes. Sure, last game went well, but it was such an outlier in terms of minutes that, number one, I'm not convinced he starts again. Number two, even if he does start, I think he's probably more likely to play under 30 minutes than over.
Okay. Yeah, it'll be interesting because Mo Harkless didn't play last game, and he was a starter before that. So if Lyles starts, well, we'll get into that. We can move around here, but we'll get into a little bit more for the point guard position. You still have guys like Gabe Vincent. There are some cheaper options, but pulling a lot of ownership too at the top in this mid-range. CJ McCollum, who's been great since coming over to New Orleans. SGA is $41. I do have legitimate concerns about a blowout there, and we can get into it. I usually don't worry too much about that, but the entire team is dead. Although at the same time, Greg, if they keep it even remotely close, it's going to be because of him, not because of Darius Baisley or, Trey Mann. And then you've got De'Aaron Fox at $33, also getting around 25% today at the top of ownership.
Yeah, and bringing the blowout point, it's really tough to weigh that on this particular slate, because you look at some of the spreads for these games today.
4 of the 8 have double-digit spreads.
Yeah, it's rough. Sixers home against the Knicks. Jazz against the Rockets, Denver at home against OKC, the Suns at home against Portland. All of those games are live to be blowouts. So while at one point I'm kind of taking that in as like, hey, I don't want to have, 100% of somebody in one of these games that is like a 14-point spread. At the same time, too, I can't write it off, because then I'm writing off half the games on the slate. So there's going to be blowouts today. It's just going to be, can I build some lineups that avoid blowouts?
I will say, though, and I agree with you, you can't weight it too heavily. There's no denying, though, that some of these teams on this slate are dreadfully bad. Like in terms of Portland's roster right now, you look at that team, you're headlined by Josh Hart and Anthony Simons, and then you're talking like Trendon Watford and Drew Eubanks and Ellaby and Keon Johnson, right? And Greg, like there are some really bad rosters on this slate tonight, given who's available.
Yeah, none of them are as bad as the Lakers or anything like that, but there's some bad teams. There's some bad teams out there for sure. But one guy that I also want to bring up here that I think should be a core play for everybody at the point guard position is CJ McCollum, who's just playing a massive role for the New Orleans Pelicans right now. He's also going to be really popular today, but I think it's warranted. It's for good reason. The $32 price tag is just too cheap for him. And you look at what he's done in New Orleans, I thought he was going to kind of take a back seat and play a lesser role with this team versus what he did in Portland, just because you just talked about how bad that Portland Trailblazers roster is. And then it was like, okay, he's going to a roster. Not the Pelicans are a great team, but they have Valanciunas, they have Ingram. There was other players that you'd think you'd have to split shots with. Just hasn't been the case. He has scored over 40 fantasy points now in every single game since February 10th. So it's almost a month of only 40 plus fantasy point games. And also you look at his usage rating in those games, he's been over 30% more often than he's been under 30%. So this Pelicans team traded for McCollum and has kind of handed over the offense to him. And at least as of late, it's worked pretty well. Back-to-back road games in Los Angeles against the Lakers and in Phoenix against the Suns. So McCollum, I think, is a good piece of chalk and just isn't priced appropriately at $32. As well as he's played since he's come to New Orleans, his salary hasn't changed at all.
Yeah, that's all but one game since he's joined the Pelicans that he has 40 plus fantasy points. Yeah. So significant. It really is. And I think outside of guys like that, point guard does thin out really quick, right? If you're just looking at the amount of top heavy ownership that you have at the position, on Yahoo. McCollum's up there. Payne is really cheap. He's up there. SGA, De'Aaron Fox. Then it falls off a cliff. And you have guys like Trey Mann who $16. I get it. They don't have any depth there, so I can understand it. Gabe Vincent against Milwaukee. I think Brogdon at 27 is reasonable if he gets an uptick in minutes and plays the fourth quarter today. But all of these guys are, low double digits, high single digits in ownership outside of the top four guys we talked about.
Yeah, and as well as SGA has played so far, especially as of late, I don't feel great about the current ownership number on him, where he's projected to right now be in, about a third of the field's lineups. If I'm playing one of the chalky point guards, I much prefer Campaign or CJ McCollum. The SGA, number one, once again, there is some blowout risk there. They're 14-point underdogs on the road in Denver. But then also with SGA, as much as there are a lot of these guys who are out for OKC, he is shooting crazy numbers from the field. He shot 12 of 16 from the field last game. Yeah. That's just something I can't project to happen again. We're talking about a guy who over the last 10 days, 2 weeks or so, he's making like 65% of his shots from the field. That's going to fall off. So to me, SGA is the guy that I want to be underweight to here. I still like McCollum and Simons, McCollum and Payne there. If I'm going contrarian, it's going to be Anthony Simons for me, just because, like you said before, the Blazers roster is so bad, same as the OKC roster, and Simons is taking all the shots the same way that SGA is taking all the shots, but we're getting Simons in single-digit amount of lineups from the field at only 9% compared to 32% for SGA. So just because of the ownership gap, I lean towards Simons there.
I get it. Hunter Schwartz, great question. How do you feel about Brandon Goodwin if Garland is out? Well, Garland did go through shoot-around, but I don't necessarily think that means he's a lock to play today. Greg, if he's out, I love Brandon Goodwin at $18 against the second fastest paced team in the league with one of the more inferior defenses in Charlotte.
Yeah. And I mean, you look at what Goodwin's done in his starts the last couple of games, 23 fantasy points. That number wasn't great, but he only shot 2 of 11 from the field. He still played 38 minutes. Last game, he just made more of his shots. Everything else is about the same. He scores 44 fantasy points. So in terms of what we should actually expect from Goodwin if he starts, it's somewhere in the middle of what he did the last couple of games. He's not going to make all the shots. He's not going to miss all the shots, but it's reasonable to project Goodwin for like low to mid 30s fantasy points if he starts. And that would still make him a pretty strong option at $18. But that's obviously contingent on Garland being out. If Garland ends up playing, then we can just write off Goodwin.
Yeah. But if you look at that price point compared to other sites, it's a very good price point for Goodwin.
Agreed.
For sure. Hey, let's go to the shooting guard position then, because I think we covered a lot there, and I want to get through this in the allotted time. Donnie Mitchell, Brandon Ingram, Keon Johnson, minimum salary. Again, like that's a spot where Keon Johnson is going to be a lot more popular elsewhere because of how cheap he is. There's a lot of value on Yahoo, as Greg already pointed out. There's just not a ton of greatness here at the position today.
There's a play I really like here, and I'm not pandering here. It might seem like it because I'm doing this with you and Mike, but James Harden projected to be in 2% of lineups.
Yeah, I get it.
I mean, he's played really well with the Philadelphia 76ers, and I had some reservations when he first started playing, just in terms of I didn't know what to expect from him because he didn't look great when he was in Brooklyn. But there was also kind of a sense that he was dogging it a little bit. He was trying to get away from the Nets. We saw the same thing when he was with Houston as well, where, there's games where Harden just didn't totally look into it. But then you also consider his age over the age of 30, and it's not like he's a super athletic type of guy. I thought there was a realistic reason to think that maybe he was just a little bit on the decline, but he's looked so good in the last couple of games now with the Philadelphia 76ers since debuting with the team. And he also took a long time off, which was also something else that was kind of a question mark to me, is just how is his conditioning going to look after he hadn't played for 3 weeks? Well, first game back, plays against the Minnesota Timberwolves on the road, blowout win for the 76ers. So his minutes somewhat limited. He could have played like 3 or 4 more minutes, still scores over 50 fantasy points in that game. Last time out against the Knicks, goes out and scores 77 fantasy points, puts up a triple-double to just about everything for the Sixers. So long-term, the fit with Harden and Embiid, I'm not exactly sure how it's going to impact their fantasy production, but considering that Harden is so unpopular on Yahoo right now, only projected to be in 2% of the field's lineups, I think that's a really high upside pay-up option, just differentiate lineups when there's so many chalk plays that are going to be popular that everybody's getting to.
I get it. I mentioned it with Adam today on the strategy show as well. 2%. he has a 61% assist rate in these 2 games. I get it. It's only 2 games. You don't have to, it's not lost on me, but if you just look at his involvement in the offense, Greg, 24 potential assists per game for him, right? Like he played 39 minutes in regulation and everything you just pointed out, not to mention that when he's interested in playing basketball, he's one of the preeminent players in the entire league. So yeah, it does feel like there's it feels like there's this concern that because he's playing with Joel Embiid, that James Harden can't be viable until his price comes down a lot. I do think you at least have to differentiate between the fact that he was playing with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, and now it's Joel Embiid. And then basically anything a lot of these other guys are doing is coming on assists from James Harden anyway. So he's only had a 22% usage rate and he's still putting up these numbers.
I think James Harden going to Philadelphia impacts Embiid's fantasy production more than it impacts Harden's, because like you said, Harden was already playing with other superstars where he had to share the ball and there was other guys to get touches. That's still the case for him playing with Embiid. And then when we talk about Embiid, on future slates and at centers and comparing him to somebody like a Nikola Jokic, we're going to see Embiid is going to lose touches to Harden, but Harden isn't going to cede more touches to Embiid than he already was to guys like Kyrie and Kevin Durant.
For sure. Outside of that, though, is there anything that really stands out to you?
I don't know that stands out is the right word. Like, I think Mitchell's a little bit too popular. I think Brandon Ingram's a little bit too popular, especially because Ingram has really struggled to mesh when it's been him alongside McCollum. It's a little curious to me to see that McCollum is so popular on the slate, yet Ingram is still projected for 17% ownership, because in general, Ingram's numbers and his usage has been down since McCollum came into the mix. But I do think that guys who are like mid-range type plays here with somewhat lowish salaries, Jalen Suggs at $20, really favorable matchup for him against the Indiana Pacers. I know Suggs' minutes in the last couple of games haven't been as high as they were in previous games, but still, he scored 36 fantasy points last game. He's scored, pretty regularly, average over 30, barring foul trouble in a lot of these games as of late. Considering the matchup against Indiana, I think that he's a good source of salary savings. And the other one, too, is Will Barton at $19. He only played 22 minutes last game, but that was another game also, blowout. The Nuggets won 124-92 over Portland. There was no real reason for him to have to play extended minutes. We look at some of the other games that he's played recently, over 30 minutes against the Kings in back-to-back games, averaged mid-30s fantasy points in those games. So I think Barton is somebody else who has a little bit of upside there. But Harden, to me, considering his ownership, is my favorite shooting guard option.
Yeah, I have no problem with that. I like him over Suggs too, just because I don't know if Fultz ends up playing a few more minutes and takes even a couple more minutes away from Jalen Suggs. At this point, I'm not really sure. So I think Barton's minutes are a lot more secure in Denver, barring a blowout or anything like that.
Yeah.
All right, Alec Burks. I hate playing this guy, Greg. I truly do. And I think I said to Adam, like, one of the things is, I feel like people just assume that when Alec Burks comes in place of, in the starting line and plays a Kemba, you have no Rose, you have no Kemba, Grimes is out as well. You just assume like, okay, he's going to get a bunch of shots up, but they still have Barrett. You still have Randall. You still have Evan Fournier, who, as we saw on Sunday, was just raining down threes and had decent enough uses. Like, Burks is the number 4 option in this offense, not every night, but if you have a standard here, he's still the number 4. He's also cheap though, and he's pulling almost a third of the field going to be on Alec Burks today. It's never fun, man.
No, but he's priced incorrectly on Yahoo. He's nearly min price. So with that in mind, it's hard to really see him failing. I know it happened last game where he only ended up putting up 11 fantasy points against Philadelphia. It's the same matchup against Philly. But still, you look at Burks' numbers for the season, and while he's not the best fantasy producer, it doesn't really matter as much because he plays so many minutes when he starts. So this year as a starter, he's made 23 starts, averaging 35 minutes per game in those starts and 27 Yahoo fantasy points. He's only $14. You just get his average results, plug him in for 35, 36 minutes. Doesn't have to be a good points per minute fantasy producer. He scores 25 fantasy points in those minutes. It's still pretty good value at $14. So I find him kind of unavoidable. I hear you about him being the 4th option. His usage rate in recent games, 10.1%, 11.5%, 10.7%. It isn't great, but if I'm going to give somebody mid-30s minutes, Even if we're going to say that he's like a 0.7 fantasy point per minute guy, you're still looking at well over 20 fantasy points at $14. So good value. I think he's kind of unavoidable for Yahoo purposes.
You're right. But it's not fun. I still stand by that. It's never fun rostering Alec Burks as chalk. That's what I'm saying.
No, I agree with that. And, if he was, this is going to seem like a dumb statement, but if he was more expensive and he was chalk, I would be more trying to get off him, but that's not really the case. And, you look at him, his DraftKings price is $5,300. His FanDuel price is $4,600. That's also relatively cheap. But we're looking at the equivalent of him being like $3,800 on DK today for his Yahoo price.
Dude, Markkanen beat me up the other day. I was all over the over 15.5 points, accurately projected his minutes. Everything was there in a good matchup. He just stunk. And now he's $19 on Yahoo, 10%. Kevin Love played 24 minutes, but didn't really take that playing time away from Markkanen. He really is as hit or miss as it comes. Like when he's shooting well and he's shooting with volume, Markkanen can be really good, but you just essentially never know what you're going to get out of the guy. But at sub 20, I have to ask you about him.
Yeah, I have him projected fairly similarly to Burks, though, and get him for $5 cheaper. Totally random aside. Markkanen had one of the weirder box scores from a shooting perspective I can remember seeing a couple games ago. He shot 6 of 18 from the field, but 6 of 9 from 3. So he was super vicious from 3. So that means from inside 3, he went 0 for 9 from the field.
That's crazy.
But made 6 of 9 of his 3-pointers. So ultimately, it was an okay game overall from a shooting perspective and from a efficiency standpoint, because so many of the threes he knocked down. But like you said, he's boomer bust and very, very dependent on hitting his threes, because if he doesn't hit those shots, he doesn't have rebounds or assists really to fall back on. He'll put up an assist here or there, a few rebounds, but he needs to be knocking down those threes. So last game, didn't make his shots. He scores 11 fantasy points. The 2 games prior to that, where he made his shots, he scored 33.7 in each of them. The game before that, where he didn't make his shots, he scored 14 fantasy points. So $19, there's upside there, but it's a high variance play and not somebody that I want to, have make or break my night.
Are you looking to get to popular Buddy Hield or Jimmy Butler? And are there any values at small forward you want to get to?
Yeah, I think Buddy Hield is another one that just makes sense at $24 over on Yahoo, because his role with the Indiana Pacers is so substantial, both in terms of usage and in terms of his playing time. So when he was with Sacramento, he really got jerked around a lot. He was starting, he was coming off the bench, then he was only playing like 15 minutes some game. Now we know with the Pacers, and Buddy Hield knows he's going to play upwards of 40 plus minutes every day. And at a minimum, he's going to be playing like 34 to 36 minutes. And at $24, also, he's one of the best shooters in the league. That kind of got lost when he was in Sacramento because that team was so poorly run. The minutes weren't there. The floor spacing was crap. Now that he's on the Pacers, and even though this isn't a good team right now, they have a direction they're building towards something. And Buddy Hield is a part of that. And they're just locking him into big minutes. So he has played at least 34 minutes in every single game since he come to the Pacers. With that more playing time, it's become much more consistent shooting. So I think Buddy Hield at $24 is the best overall small forward play on Yahoo.
Yeah, far better than other sites. And that,
yes,
you see so often someone will play on one site and then like, all right, let me come play at Yahoo, and they just kind of keep the same mindset of, you know what I mean? Like, okay, well, I built this and I like this, and I'm looking to get to these guys. Buddy Hield is just a far better value at a weak position at small forward. You don't have multi-position eligibility. I get it. I just like him a lot more here than I do pretty much anywhere else today. Yeah,
totally. 7,500 on FanDuel, 7,300 on DK. So, that's the equivalent of him being like 30-ish bucks or something like that on Yahoo. So he just hasn't been, his price has gone up a little bit. He was $21 in previous games and he's gone up to 24. It's still not enough.
No. I know a lot of you guys already ride with us at Awesemo, but hit that subscribe if you don't, and thumbs up even if you do. But awesemo.com/join if you want to get in on the real goods over there. All the tools that we have for every sport, you name it. If they have contests out there, we've got content for it. All of our tools built by Awesemo himself, Alex Baker, you know him. Boom Bust tool, the top stack tool, the lineup builder, everything. Awesemo ownership projections free today. PGA top golfers tool free today. NHL ownership free today. But all of those tools for any sport, whether it's NASCAR, golf, UFC, football, baseball, basketball, hockey, esports, doesn't matter. Everything. You could do a week, a month, a year, one sport, all sports. If you just wanted to check it out, you could do Express Pass for a sport for a week for less than $5. So whatever your style of play, whatever your budget, no matter how seriously you take it or don't, we got you covered. Awesemo.com/join. And if you're not ready to get in, take advantage of our free tools today. You don't even need an account. All right, we got power forward and center to go. Let's rip through these, Greg. We got a few minutes here. Power forward, you mentioned this at the top of the show. Jackson Hayes, almost minimum salary. Trey Lyles, almost minimum salary. Can I just say, now that I think of this, right? It seems kind of crazy that Harden would only be 2%.
Yeah.
When you have so much value at other positions like point guard and power forward, and we'll get to center.
And the shooting guard position sucks. So
exactly.
we have all of these point guard. We've got, Campaign, depending if he starts, he looks like a really good value option at power forward. I don't like Trey Lyles as much as the field, but I love Jackson Hayes today. I don't understand how Jackson Hayes is still almost min price, considering that he's now seemingly locked into the Pelicans starting lineup. They like going with the big front court of him next to Valanciunas. And we've seen pretty good results from Jackson Hayes as a starter. Last game, plays 30 minutes, scores 29 fantasy points. So to me, I think Jackson Hayes is another really strong option at power forward. And to just bring this into what you said before, nobody's rostering Harden, but they're rostering all of these cheap guys at other positions. Just pay up for Harden, make your lineups different, because everybody's going to be on the same value options. And I think they all make sense for the most part, even if I'm a little bit lighter on Trey Lyles. Like, I don't want to get away from Jackson Hayes. I don't want to get away from Campaign. So how do I make my lineups different? Just pay up for somebody different who has upside. And that is
Absolutely.
James Harden.
Absolutely. And but that's the last point you made. Pay up for a guy that has upside. Like, you're paying up for a guy that still has an 80 fantasy point ceiling. You're not like, all right, let me go different at value and, hope the guy doesn't give me 5. With Harden, very easy that you come out here and get another huge game. So I'm with you, man. Go ahead.
So one other point here, because at the power forward position, just play Jackson Hayes, $12, really, really good value play. I assume he's going to start for the Pelicans again. And there are not good pivots on the cheap end. Like, there isn't an equivalent to Jackson Hayes, whereas, we're getting a low-owned James Harden. So not to hammer that point home too much, but it's just easier to pivot on the high end than it is on the low end, because I just don't see anybody that's nearly comparable to Jackson Hayes. People could argue Trey Lyles, but they're similar in terms of ownership. 35% for Trey Lyles, 40% for Jackson Hayes. Hayes is my preferred power forward option there. And at least in the build I have right now, Hayes is in the majority of my lineups because I just think he's by far the best power forward option.
Yeah, I agree. And he's almost minimum salary, good matchup against Sacramento. It's a phenomenal spot. Total 235.5 in this game. Do you want to pay up at all for power forward then? Like, do you want to get to the Wendell Carter Jr., who's been good, or Randall or Mobley, or are you looking to stick more in the value territory at this position?
Yeah, value of power forward, Jackson Hayes being my favorite. There is still some reasons to consider Trey Lyles if he starts again, but once again, I don't like him as much as Jackson Hayes. But then there's other guys too. O'Shea Brissett's been playing extended minutes. He's under $20. Jalen Smith, I don't have him projected nearly as well as Jackson Hayes, but if you're looking to spend up at guard positions, maybe when we talk about centers, if you want to spend up for Jokic or something like that, you could go with Jackson Hayes at power forward and then plug Jalen Smith into the forward spot, because Jalen Smith also only projected to be in 4% of the field's lineups, and he's likely going to be starting for the Pacers, and hopefully he's going to give us somewhat reliable minutes. I don't think they're going to go out and play him like 30 plus or anything like that, but the Pacers have a young forward here in Jalen Smith who's on an expiring deal. They're trying to figure out if they want to bring him back long-term or not. He's a good points per minute fantasy producer, and it seems at the very least he's going to be getting somewhere in the neighborhood of 24 to 26 minutes, which is what we got in the last few games, 25, 26, 29 minutes. And that's enough for me to project him for mid-20s fantasy points. He's still a good value.
Okay. Ready to wrap this up with center?
Let's do it.
We've done pretty solid here in terms of time. I'm pretty impressed.
Yeah. No, you got this down good. I didn't. You really took to heart what I said at the top of the show.
This is not like me either, I'll tell you that. But I feel like we haven't just sped through everything. We're actually getting all the information out there, right? Like, you could do 30 minutes. We could talk about 5 players and be like, hey, we nailed it. But I think we're getting through everything. You're ripping through these players. Dude, Drew Eubanks, $10 Mo Bamba's 15, super volatile, but I get it, especially against Indy. Joval, Jokic. I will give you one guy that I think is viable today if we're going to be going crazy value everywhere else because he's getting 4% ownership. Sabonis is playing 37 minutes in close games, and this game could stay close. And we've got him projected at 4%. I think $41 is reasonable. And he's the type of guy now. He comes over to Sacramento. If he's not in foul trouble, if it's not a blowout, getting 37 minutes in regulation. He leads the team in assist rate since he came over, dismantling everyone in rebound rate, 24.5, 25% usage rate, or at least it was before last game where he got in foul trouble. There's just a lot of upside with a guy like Sabonis. I also love over 35.5 points, rebounds, and assists on him today. I think it was even money on a couple books last I looked. Sorry, go ahead. Center position's all you.
No, I like Sabonis as a low owned shout out, and I think people might under project his minutes a little bit today because of the foul trouble in recent games, but not necessarily a predictable thing. Last couple of games, though, he's picked up 5 fouls in each of them, held him to 31 and 33 minutes. Look at his other games with the Kings before that, when he wasn't dealing with foul difficulties, 37 minutes in each of them. And also, let's look at the current goals of the Sacramento Kings. And I know a lot of people who have listened to me do shows lately of when there's been the Kings on Slate, they've heard me bring up these same talking points. But I think it bears repeating just because the minutes have dipped for Sabonis in the last couple of games. It's only due to foul trouble. The Kings traded Halliburton for Sabonis in an effort to win now. They're not trying to win in the future. I mean, I'm sure they would like to, but they're not going to win now. They're not going to win in the future either. But they made the trade to try to win now, to try to get into the play-in game, to try to make the playoffs. And I think that if they don't do that, it's going to be viewed as a failure within the organization. So Fox and Sabonis, as long as they avoid foul trouble, these guys are going to play all of the minutes they could handle over the last month or so of the season until the team falls out of the playoff race. So I agree with you. I think Sabonis is a pretty high upside play for lower ownership. If we're just going to go with the chalk here, I have no issue with going to Drew Eubanks. It looks like he's locked into that starting role for the Portland Trailblazers, and the minutes are on the rise. So 2 starts with Portland. First one, he plays 21 minutes. Last game, he played 29 minutes. I just think he plays a full allotment of minutes now as the starting center. So he's a really good value option at the position.
Yeah, it's never fun with a guy like Eubanks, but if he's getting minutes at the best position for value, you have to consider him. And, Sabonis' rotation last game was super odd because he played 8.5 minutes and then came back with 35 seconds in the first quarter. He picked up those fouls real quick. But he played through this. He played into the second. What did he play? Like 3 minutes into the second. Who knows how many minutes he would have played in that game? He played almost 19 minutes in the second half, though. So, and obviously they came back and mounted a huge lead against them with him on the floor. So, I think that's what you made. That point you made is solid on Sabonis. If he's not in foul trouble, the guy's getting, I think, minimum 35, but I think he's pacing 37 minutes in competitive games. So, what about Jokic?
Yeah, so I think we have to talk about Jokic and Embiid in the same breath. And the ownership gap between the two of them isn't wide enough. We've got Jokic projected to be in 18% of the field's lineups, Embiid at 14%. And if you have the space to spend up at center, I just strongly prefer Jokic over Embiid. Like we were talking about before with Harden, I think the inclusion of Harden to the Philadelphia 76ers is going to hurt Embiid's production more than it's going to hurt Harden's, just because there is somebody else now for Embiid to share touches with. And it might not seem like much of a drop off because the last 2 games, 36% usage rate, 39% for Joel Embiid, but he was pretty regularly putting up a usage rate over 40% for about a stretch of a month. So this still does represent a little bit of a downtick for him. Jokic is competing with nobody for touches on the Denver Nuggets. So we have Embiid at $54, Jokic at $56. In the build that I made for the purpose of the show, I ended up coming in overweight to the field on Jokic, but underweight to the field on Embiid. So long story short, if you have the space to spend up for a center, it should be Jokic. If you have the ability to spend up for anybody on this slate, the answer is still Jokic for me. I think he's the best fantasy producer in the league. And as well as Embiid has played recently because of the addition of Harden, I have Jokic projected for about 5.5 more fantasy points today. So it's a pretty big gap between the two for me.
Yeah, it's a significant gap at a similar price point. Last thing I'll say, if you watch the strategy show this morning, you already know, but I do think it's worth considering if you are going heavy on SGA to make sure to have a decent amount of those lineups with Jokic, because if SGA has a big game, it's likely that if it stays close, it's probably going to be because of Gilgeous-Alexander and not somebody else. And if that's the case, you're getting additional minutes from Jokic. And With the amount of value on this Yahoo slate, you can do that really easily, I would think, Greg.
Yeah, I don't think it's hard either. There's a lot of value guys, a lot of different positions. The only center value that I really like here for super cheap is going to be Drew Eubanks. And then just looking through some of the other positions, point guard, a lot of value. Shooting guard, not a lot of value. That's why we like James Harden there. Small forward, Burks, Hield, lots of value there. Power forward, he's really good value. A lot of people are going to be rostering Trey Lyles. So then you kind of start to find the positions where it's viable to spend up at, especially because we could roster two centers. You could play Eubanks and Jokic together. Harden's another priority spend up. So just kind of a summary. Favorite spend up options, Jokic and Harden. Favorite value options here, Campaign, Alec Burks, Jackson Hayes, and Drew Eubanks.
Love it. We're in. We're out. Bing, bang, boom. Follow Greg at G. Ehrenberg DFS, me at Lafayette_D on the Twitters. Thanks to our boy Mike Lawrence for producing the show. Remember, use that link in the description or the one in chat. Free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. Literally everything on the site. If you haven't done so yet, all you got to do, use the link, deposit $10. They'll give you 10 back in free play and enter a paid contest. You'll be hearing from us. We'll get you set up. See you back here next week, Greg and myself. I'm assuming you'll be on this one with me. I don't know.
Find out. Only time will tell.
Peace.